Hello and welcome to Wire Talks. Most of us use leverage in some form, that is, borrow capital to invest, possibly for a property or for a vehicle, or for other investment purposes like investing into stocks, mutual funds, bonds, or fixed income securities, ETFs, or even forex or currencies. The basic premise of leverage is to be able to generate a return which is greater than the interest paid on the borrowed capital. Leverage is rightly called a double edged sword. While it helps to generate a higher return on our capital when the asset prices move higher, it can also lead to substantial losses, including possible loss of our entire capital if the asset prices move downwards. Hence, what is important is to know the risk. To know the risk of leverage. While leverage inherently is not bad, what is important to understand is what could go wrong if asset prices were to move not in our favor. When it comes to leverage, one of the frequently asked questions is how much leverage should one take? 40%, 50%, 80%? To which ideally there is no right or a wrong answer. A lot depends on the risk taking ability of an investor, especially when the prices don't move in our favor, as I mentioned earlier. And when prices move downwards, the risk is of a margin call that would come and hit an investor. Allow me to help you understand this concept through an example. Let's look at the following example. To begin with, to see how loan to value ratio is calculated. If you look at this example, let's assume I contribute $1,000, take a leverage or a loan of another $1,000, leading to an overall amount invested of $2,000, giving me a leverage ratio or a loan to value ratio of 50%, which is $1,000 divided by $2,000. If you look it further, let's assume if I were to take a loan of $1,860, my leverage ratio in this case increases to 65%. And further ahead, if you look at the last example, if I were to take a loan of $4,000 against my own equity or capital of $1,000, my loan to value ratio balloons to 80%. Now let's look at how the market values or the asset price movement impacts the loan to value ratios. Let's take the example of 50% loan to value. That is, I were to invest $1,000, take a leverage or a loan of another $1,000 for an overall invested value of $2,000. Now let's assume the portfolio value moves higher by 10%. Note in all these scenarios and every leverage situation, the amount that we owe to the financial institution remains the same, which means any change in the portfolio value is reflected in our own capital. So in this case, the portfolio value moves to $1,200, leverage remaining the same as $1,000, and the loan to value ratio thus comes down to 45%. If the portfolio were to move higher by 25% overall, the loan to value ratio, if you were to see, comes down to 40%, which is a loan of $1,000 as against an overall portfolio value of $2,500. Now, this is a good scenario to be in. What happens if the asset prices move lower? In this case, if you were to see, assume the portfolio value goes down by 25%, which means our loan to value ratio increases from 50 to 67%. That is a loan of $1,000 against a portfolio value now of only $1,500. If the portfolio value was to move down by 30% overall, which means a loan to value ratio of 71%, that is a loan of $1,000 as against a portfolio value of $1,400. And that's where the risk starts to build in. Because as the loan to value keeps increasing, there's a real risk of a margin call coming in from the financial institution, which would require an investor to either give some other security as a collateral or to provide cash to bring the overall leverage ratios down. And this is what is important to understand when it comes to leverage. So, as you saw in these examples, the risk comes in when the asset price starts to move downwards. In such scenarios, if there's a margin call and if an investor is unable to pay the margins, the financial institution holds the right to sell the underlying portfolio to recoup their loan values. The intent here is not to scare you against leverage, The idea here is to highlight that leverage inherently is not a bad strategy. It does help when asset prices move higher to earn a higher return. But as long as we as an investor understand the risk when it comes, when the market moves the other way or the asset price starts to move downwards, we should be ready for that scenario and we should not be blindsided by the risk that comes in. And now is the trivia time. Do you know who created the Dow Jones Industrial Average Index, one of the most followed indices globally? It was created by Charles Dow and Edward Jones, and it was first calculated on 26th of May 1896. If you like the content, please subscribe to the channel, press the bell button, put in your comments on what topics you would want to be covered. And with that, wish you all a very happy, healthy, and a year full of laughter. Happy 2025. Thank you.